Okay, here we are back again. This is Pink Glue, October 20th, episode 145. Lasers on fighter jets and LiDAR in iPhone 12. Where is this world taking us? And the big question, will there be an iPhone 13? Or will they skip it and go to iPhone 14? Okay, so we have episode 145. This is Pink Glue. I'm going to start here today. What is the job of LiDAR? Many of us are not fully aware of what LiDAR means or how it's used in society. The job of a LiDAR sensor is to map an area surrounding it by measuring distances of objects via reflecting light rays. Apple introduced the sensor in its high-end iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max flagships to enhance photography. This is not the first time the company is using LiDAR sensors in its products. Now, hands up anybody if you really think it was there to enhance photography. LiDAR is very expensive technology, and once you can implement it out to the masses, let's say via a phone, you can start driving down the price. And right now, there's two routes that are really important for LiDAR. One is the gaming industry, which is also obviously $1 trillion industry, and that allows for the 3D play space and also the like Oculus Vision, that sort of the gamifying. So if you have a tool on your phone, you can be in that game arena and play. The second reason that LiDAR has become so important, and even more so than the former, is autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles right now rely on 3 eyes on the car. They have a camera, of course, and a LiDAR and a radar. Multiple LiDARs and radars, depending on which is the manufacturer involved or the R&D for it. So I find this very interesting that essentially there were no real advances to the iPhone 12 that was announced last week. In fact, it was essentially an iPhone 4 and iPhone 5 coming out again, which is good because most people seem to like those, but you don't think you're going to pay over $1,200 for that. And of course, as is Apple's style, they really pounded on how environmentally sound they are for shipping, and yet what they did is they made the boxes smaller so they could ship more, which helped with logistics chain. Excellent. But what the hell is not in the box? How about a charger? How about a listening device? Key tools that you need in order to use your device were not included in order to shrink the size for them to be able to tout environmental. It got a long ways to go. There was a big drop. We'll see how long the CEO, Tim Cook, stays in play there. But it's just not innovative. We'll see what their next release comes out with. But back to LiDAR. Why would Apple invest so much to put LiDAR on their phones? I believe it is to divide the cost to drive the price down for the use of LiDARs. This is a global move for tech companies. So let me go to the next step. So here we go. This is thenextweb.com. And let's see if there's this says, wait, what's a LiDAR sensor? And why is it on the iPhone 12 Pro? Remember when there used to be just one camera hole in the back of the phone? Or hey, remember when phones didn't have cameras? Or hey, remember when you had to talk on a phone with a cord that was attached to a wall and use dial-up? That goes way back. Okay, let's see what it says here. The story's by Ivan Mehta, and it says, if you've read about autonomous cars, you might know that LiDAR sensors, light detection and ranging, play a huge part in the self-driving part of the car. The job of a LiDAR sensor is to map an area surrounding it by measuring distances of objects via reflecting light rays. Apple introduced the sensor in its high-end iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max flagships to enhance photography. This is not the first time the company is using LiDAR sensor in its product. In March of 2020, the Cupertino-based company included the sensor in its new iPad. However, the primary purpose of the sensor in that device was to aid augmented reality. So we have an AR spin there. With the new iPhone, Apple claims that it'll help you with 3 things: photo and video effects, precise placement of AR objects, and object and room scanning. The last two applications might be largely for developers and businesses like construction that need to map a room. For an average consumer, photo and video effects might be the most interesting part. Because LiDAR can work in the dark by shooting lasers to calculate distances, Apple's using it to improve the autofocus on the high-end phones. The company claims that because of the sensor, the iPhone12 Pro phones has 6 times faster autofocus in low light as compared to a normal camera. Plus, the LiDAR sensor enables the device to take better portrait mode photos in low light conditions. That's excellent, but how many people that have an iPhone need that level of photography? The concept of using a dedicated depth sensor is not new. Plenty of mid-range phones, such as the OnePlus Nord, use a depth sensor camera to enhance portrait mode photos, but these sensors work better in daylight than low light. Some devices, such as the Huawei P30 Pro and Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra, have a time of light TOF sensor. It uses infrared rays to map the surrounding. You can read about TOF sensors in the explainer here. So that's a little bit of an overview, and he has a link to an iPad Pro's LiDAR with infrared. Of course, I'll put this down in the description. So let's leap on to what they were talking about with self-driving vehicles. This is Auto Revolution, and this was produced yesterday, actually, by Theodore Bersetta. LiDAR, the technology to make self-driving cars a reality. During the 2005 DARPA challenge. Now, this challenge was a ploy by the military or intelligence agencies to get tech companies to spend money on R&D to come up with the next level of autonomous movement. Now, at that point, DARPA already had autonomous vehicles for military purposes, but they were extremely limited and couldn't interact in populations. And so they decided if they throw some money on the table, some teams, specifically through universities, would come forward and they would spend all the time and energy and raise their own R&D money in order to get the prize. The first round had no winner. The second round did have a winner. And here it states, as I continue reading, engineers from Stanford University came closest in achieving the decades-old dream of self-driving car, as envisioned in staples of the sci-fi genre like Time Cop. To make out the world around it, the vehicle used something called LiDAR, a technology never before implemented on cars. Arguably, the first commercial large-scale application of the technology for the automotive industry came in 2018 when GM used LiDAR sensors mounted to trucks for accurately 3D mapping the entirety of the U.S. highway system. The data was to be fed into their Cadillac CT6 and later the CT5 and CT4 in order to allow these to navigate our nation's highways all by themselves with pinpoint accuracy. Okay, well, this isn't factual, but you get the idea of what it's going after. LiDAR had been implemented long before that. But essentially, what it's doing is out of this DARPA challenge, there were a number of teams who came the closest and actually won. And out of that came Silicon Valley's sprint into autonomous vehicles. Started out primarily being funded by Google. So it became I think it was the Google Car Project, and then it moved over to Google. I think it moved into Google X, and then it went into Waymo, and now it's a standalone company that's operating in multiple cities. So LiDAR has been very, very important around that path is the point of self-driving cars a reality. Here, LiDAR and radar information. This is 100 applications or uses of LiDAR technology. Let's see, this article is is on LiDARradar.com. And it looks like it might be an individual site. I'm not seeing a specific name here. Let's just, well, quite a bit of scrolling there. Let me see if I can just drag it down to the bottom. Yeah, I don't see a quick reference, so kudos to the person who would have created this. And it looks like they're even offering free courses. I'm not sure that the depth of that. The 100 applications or uses of LiDAR technology. LiDAR technology is a remote sensing technology that measures the distance to an object by illuminating the target with laser and then analyzing the reflected light. The laser pulses travel at the speed of light to the object, and the laser is then reflected back to the sensors. The time taken for the pulses to hit the object and be reflected back to the sensors calculated and then used to calculate the distance to the object. LiDAR technology has several applications and uses across various industries and applications. Below are some of the applications. So we have DEM, stands for Digital Elevation Model. I'm just going to go over these. If you're interested, you can come back to the link. Microtopography, soil profiling, forest planning and management, precision forestry, tourism and park management, environmental assistance, biodiversity for birds, and then flood modeling, ecological and land classification, river surveys, and then coastline mapping and management. And let's keep going. There's mining there, viewshed analysis, solar energy technology, residential lighting, glacier levels, gaming. Gaming's a big one. We'll talk about that next. Crime scene reconstruction, LiDAR for architecture, recording of buildings, cellular network planning, vehicle automation, meteorology. You can really just start digging in here. Military uses, wind turbines, urban surveys, tsunami prediction and modeling, crop planning, soil sensing. You can see that understanding LiDAR and how they can be applied in the world around you is going to have a vast effect. But again, why was it put in the iPhone 12? As we come here, I've got the Washington Post article. Now, this was from 2017, specifically July 5th of 2017, when most people would have been on holiday. How video games help give us a self-driving car. Now, this is really an important point that is often overlooked. This is by Brian Fung, and again, July of 2017. And so let me just start reading here. Self-driving cars, they're the future of transportation, and they're getting smarter all the time. Thanks to advances in software and artificial intelligence, these machines are now able to distinguish between cars and cyclists, or between pedestrians and your pet. Many can now see, just like you can, picking out objects and obstacles approaching ahead. All the tech could eventually save lives, helping to prevent the 95% of car accidents that safety regulators estimated are caused by human error each year. Now somebody jumping forward might think, of course, gaming has helped self-driving vehicles, because we know that drones are also usually linked with autonomous functions. And so maybe somebody understanding how to fly a drone using a gaming scenario, gaming console, is more apt to be able to transfer skill set. And I'm not going to argue that. I think there is some validity there. And in operating self-driving vehicles, understanding what you're seeing on the screen from a video game perspective is very different from somebody who's never played that level of video game. So there are some advantages there, but this is not at all what this is about. It's actually about the memory. So let's continue here. But none of this would be possible without a piece of hardware many of us take for granted in our own home computers. The technology that traces back to the earliest days of modern personal computing, one that people tend to associate more with World of Warcraft than newfangled widgets on wheels. We're talking about the graphics processor. Now, who was going to guess that? Okay, let's see here. In mainstream PCs and graphics processors, often found on a graphics card, is what allows computers to draw all those pixels and holograms that make up today's photorealistic video games. But as these processors have grown ever more and more powerful, engineers have discovered their utility in all sorts of non-gaming applications. Graphics processing units, or GPUs, have transcended their origins to become entire computers in their own right. The GPU is now powering everything from games to the visual effects you see in Hollywood films, said Danny Shapiro, the senior director of automotive at NVIDIA, which accounts for roughly 75% of the $7.8 billion market for GPUs. GPUs said, it looks like there's, said Shapiro, are central to professional graphics for automakers that are designing cars, to doctors and researchers that are researching for cures for cancer and using medical imaging techniques. Now, NVIDIA is headquartered right at the Santa Clara Sunnyvale border, and they have their own team of self-driving autonomous vehicles. They're really far ahead in the space. And for any more information on the validity of what they have and how many cars, you can always go to California DMV, type in, I guess the search would be California DMV autonomous vehicles, and you will see which companies have autonomous vehicles with permits to operate in California. Last look, there's usually about 46 on the list that come and go. I think at one point it got up to 60 something. But as you look through the list, you'll see quite a few names that you might not have expected in that space. It's a sign of how big the GPU business has grown that some 200 other companies work with NVIDIA's automotive unit alone. GPUs are even part of the brains behind artificial intelligence, appearing in technologies like the Amazon Echo, which converts natural human speech into data that machines can understand. The combination of GPUs and CPU are now available that can accelerate analytics, deep learning, high-performance computing, and scientific simulations. Chris Nevin, research director for oil and gas issues at the research firm IDC, told ZDNet last month. Now, this is really important because historically, more is better. So the more lines of code you can write, the more opportunities for bells and whistles you're going to get. With autonomous vehicle, it's the fewest lines of code possible. But the memory is what's key, because it is through the simulations and the gathering of data that the cars are able to move on the road, are able to sense via eyes and ears on the road safety, are able to simulate the data, and then are able to safely navigate and learn. So that model of having as few lines of code as possible, but as much breadth for the computing power or the brains of the computer is really key. And we're really owing that to the growth of the GPU as dedicated by the gaming industry. To understand why GPUs have become so prevalent in next generation technologies, we have to talk about how they work. Traditionally, the brain in most PCs has been the CPU, or the central processing unit. These chips are made by companies such as Intel. Apple has also been making its own proprietary chips for the iPad and iPhone. The distinguishing feature of this technology is that it's designed to run calculations serially, one after another, very, very quickly. The rise of dual and quad-core CPUs have expanded the capabilities, allowing for more computations to occur simultaneously. These chips are still ideal for machines that only need to run a few processors at a time. But when it comes to technology like self-driving vehicles, where the computers are constantly receiving and digesting information, multitasking becomes much more important, and that's where GPUs excel. Computer researchers began to discover the potential behind GPUs as far back as the late 1990s, when the market was awash with dozens of competing chip makers. Their products found their way into desktop PCs and gaming consoles like the Sega Dreamcast and Xbox, enabling consumers to experience groundbreaking titles like Half-Life, Quake, and Halo by simultaneously and efficiently controlling the generation of shapes on a screen. GPUs help bring first vector graphics, then individual pixels to life. By the early 2000s, GPUs were being pit directly against CPUs in computing tests, with some results showing enormous promise for graphics processors. So here we go. You can read more about the history. But this is why self-driving cars find GPUs so helpful. Through the use of optical cameras, laser, and radar sensors, cars look at their surroundings by taking many measurements per second. So all of this has led up from what is a LiDAR? Why is there a LiDAR on the iPhone 12 Pro? And sometimes what we're told is not the full reality. LiDAR is important in the technology for self-driving vehicles. Additional uses of LiDAR. How video games, specifically the need for the graphics improvement, GPUs, has helped parlay into the possibility for self-driving vehicles. And then this is what I wanted to get to. This right here, you can find it on YouTube, and again, the link will be below. This is Florida McKees, and the article is called Experimental Military Hypersonic Aircraft Deploy High-Powered Lasers to Superheat the Atmosphere. So in this, he's got a series of different clips together here and articles that are very descriptive, but essentially each one of these lines, and you can see this is in the United States, this is the Gulf down here, and this says NASA facility, and this says a weapons evaluation group. And each of these lines they're estimating is about 440 miles. And what he's determined is that by putting a laser in front of something like an airplane or even a brick as a projectile, but if an airplane is what he's focusing on, by putting a laser, it cuts through and breaks away any resistance. And thus this entity, mechanical entity in this case, can fly fast and far. It just breaks the wind essentially in front of it is what it's doing. And so he was looking at some experience where this has been applied. And again, this is an application of lasers. So if we're putting lasers on fighter jets, we're putting LiDAR in iPhones, what's next? So I might add that as I was watching this description, I was noting that one of their launch sites was over off the coast of California, kind of off the coast of Long Beach is the closest there. And in one of my trips down there, this would have been approximately 5 years ago, when I was driving on the freeway. It was very late at night, very dark outside, few cars on the road, so few headlights, which is odd for LA. So this was really the middle of the night hours. I saw the same light shot across the freeway, and I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was a missile launch, but I never saw an explosion on the other side. And then shortly thereafter, there was another one, and I never got an explanation for what it was. But in the clip of the view of the movement, it looks very, very similar to what was being described here. And knowing that that was a military testing facility, there's a potential that it's not only being tested in these locations here, also off the West Coast. And then the articles also go into testing that's specifically going on in Brazil. And I believe this is the article that also mentioned Argentina. So here we go. Once again, this is Pink Blue, episode 145, lasers on fighter jets and LiDAR in iPhone 12. Have a great evening.